I think people don't realize that retirement is an emotional and a social thing as well as financial and working. And I think people don't prepare themselves properly for all this emotional change that will happen. For example, some people are so invested in their job that they even use it in their email. I remember interviewing a man who was recently retired, and his email was johndoe@lawyer.com, because being a lawyer was so important to him. He included that and everything. And if somebody's like that, it's going to be a very hard emotional change to go from working and being recognized for your career and being home. Hello, and welcome to Not Born Yesterday, a podcast dedicated to older adults and the challenges and joys of aging. I'm Miriam Goodman.
Not Born Yesterday is brought to you by Next Village SF. Next Village SF is a local nonprofit providing older adults in the northeast neighborhoods of San Francisco with support to help them age in place. I'm your co-host, Lynn Winter Gross. Most of us are coming out of a difficult few years because of the pandemic, and some of us are having trouble getting back to whatever their normal was. For those of you who've been working outside the home and live with a partner, these months of being together 24/7 may have been a shock, and each of you might have discovered things about the other person that bother you more than they did before. And some couples have found those intense moments a welcome renewal of their relationship, a time to realize what brought you together in the first place, and how those bonds can continue as you venture out again.
For full disclosure, a few years ago, I wrote a book called Too Much Togetherness, Surviving Retirement as a Couple. I had no idea at the time that soon we all would be thrust into a situation of too much togetherness. Lynn recently reminded me that the issues I covered in the book were not just about retirement, but really about aging positively while getting along with a spouse, partner, or housemate, re-examining our relationships with our adult children, and claiming time for ourselves. While interviewing hundreds of men and women for the book, I learned that many of us looked at how our parents' generation treated their later years and were determined to do our retirement differently. And that awareness really came to the forefront as we lived through lockdowns and illness and forced separation from loved ones, and came to realize that one needs to prepare psychologically for life after work, not just financially.
So today, Miriam and I want to share some of the things she learned about positive aging and how too much togetherness during the pandemic might lead to freer and more rewarding lives today. Miriam, welcome to Not Born Yesterday as a guest this time.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
In doing research for your book, I wanted to ask, you interviewed couples all across the country to find out what their lives were like when one or both of them were retired. What interested you in doing this kind of research?
Well, people around me were starting to retire, and I noticed that not everybody was retiring at the same time. Sometimes the men had been working straight through since their 20s, had never taken any time off, and they were happy to retire, whereas their wives might have started a career, took time off when the children were young, went back, maybe started a different career, but whatever it is, by the time they got to their 60s, let's say, they were finally in a position of power, something that they had been waiting for, had been promoted enough, got the job that they really wanted, and the thought of retiring right then didn't seem right to them. So I noticed that there was conflict with couples. One guy across the street from me said, "Oh, let's bicycle across the country." Number one, his wife wasn't so great into bicycling, but number two, she was a management consultant. She had really interesting clients. She felt like she was really helping people, and she was dealing with clients all over the world. And she said, "I don't want to go on a bicycle trip. I want to keep working. I like what I'm doing." So it's a conflict for everyone. In this case, the guy started a consulting business at home so that he would have something to do as well. But it's about accommodation. I noticed this a lot. I noticed that my mother had retired when my father did, and it was a mistake for her because she was a newspaper editor, and her social life basically was involved with being involved with the newspaper, and they would go to concerts and plays and openings as part of her job, but as well it added a lot to their lives. And so when she stopped doing that and was home with my father, they started to think about traveling, and then my father died. And so here my mother had no partner and no job. And it was hard. And I thought, I'm not going to do it that way. And I hope others don't do it that way.
So your book is called Too Much Togetherness. We just came through a COVID pandemic, and couples were together maybe more than they ever thought they would be. Was that a rehearsal for what it's like now that people are retiring and are together maybe too much?
It could be seen as a rehearsal, but I don't think it exactly is, because with retirement, you're retired for life. With COVID, nobody knew. I mean, I remember the first time somebody bought a box of 50 masks. I said, 50 masks, this is going to be over in a month. Why do we need so many masks? So, there was all that uncertainty about COVID, and people were accommodating each other. I think because the husband and wife both knew that we didn't know how long COVID was going to last. We didn't know how it might affect our families. So people were, I think, hopefully that they were working together better than they might have had it been just retirement. But it does give us some clues about how we might want to live in the future if we're still working and we're thinking about retirement. I think the difference is with the COVID, there was no plan. It just happened suddenly. With retirement, hopefully you will plan what you want. I think people don't realize that retirement is an emotional and a social thing as well as financial and working. And I think people don't prepare themselves properly for all this emotional change that will happen. For example, some people are so invested in their job that they even use it in their email. I remember interviewing a man who was recently retired, and his email was johndoe@lawyer.com. Because being a lawyer was so important to him, he included that in everything. And if somebody's like that, it's going to be a very hard emotional change to go from working and being recognized for your career and being home or being whatever it is that you're doing. So I think people will have to understand that first and then plan how they're going to deal with it.
So many of us are defined by our jobs or what our jobs were. I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher, I'm running my own business, I'm a whatever. And then you don't have that. And so I assume that without that definition or that self-definition, it puts some stress on people and therefore on the couple.
I think it could. It depends on how much you are emotionally involved with your title and with your career. I remember years ago, we belonged to a tennis club, and we didn't only see people in their tennis clothes. And it wasn't a given, but I never heard anybody talking about work when they were playing tennis. They would talk about almost anything else. And then every once in a while, I run into somebody downtown who was at the tennis club. And I almost wouldn't recognize them because they were wearing a suit instead of tennis clothes. And this happened often. And I thought, isn't it great that we're not defining these people that we see on the weekend with their position or what their job is, or we don't even ask them what it is. So I hope that people will create a persona for themselves that doesn't include what their job is, so that you meet somebody on a person-to-person basis without making any prejudgments.
To go back to the married couple, I just assumed, and I think many of us assumed, that when retirement came, that was their great time that they'd always been waiting for, to spend all their time together, going here, traveling, doing whatever together. And you're saying, well, maybe that's not always so perfect.
I'm not sure that it's not always so perfect. I think it depends on the couple. I don't think it's a given that everybody wants to do that. Some people love it. Some people think it's great. And in fact, they've told me about this, that during COVID, they got to know their spouse in a different way and remembered why they fell in love. So they said it was great. But other people find that too much togetherness really is a problem. They want to change. They want to get out of the house. I remember interviewing a woman who lived in a very cold climate, and she said she would go out the door and run even when it was snowing and sleeting, because she needed at least an hour away from her husband during the day. So everybody has to figure out what works for them. Sometimes it's great if they like to do the same things. If they take a walk together, if they play tennis, they play golf, whatever it is, that's great. But if they don't have those interests in common, doesn't mean that they're not a good couple. They can find new things to do. Maybe they'll discover that they really like cooking together, or maybe they'll decide they want to do volunteer work together. There are ways you can be together and still have your own life. I think that's the most important message of Too Much Togetherness, is that keeping your own life to yourself and doing what you want to do makes you a better partner.
So what are some strategies for having the together time and not have it be too much?
Well, I think it's about conversation and communication and planning. All those things are so important. I think a couple has to sit down before they retire and say, well, what's your view? And what do you think we're going to do? And the other has to do the same thing. I remember I interviewed a couple in Minnesota who lived in Minneapolis, but the husband's dream when they retired was to go to live by a lake so he could be in his boat and go fishing every day. And his wife agreed, not sure what she was doing. They sold their house. They moved to a little community on a lake. He started with his fishing. She noticed that she missed the concerts. She missed the plays. She missed all the culture that she had in Minneapolis. He injured his back and no longer was able to put his boat in and out of the water. And here they were, had sold their house, were living far away from their family and friends, and they didn't know what to do. And they could not afford to move back and buy another house. So they had to find a new way of dealing with this time together that didn't involve him and his boat. All these things you have to talk about. And I know a lot of women report that they've been so accommodating to their husband's desires. Well, you don't have to be the rest of your life. It's not too late to stick up for yourself and say, you know what? I want to be near the kids. I want to see my grandchildren grow. I don't want to move to a golfing community a couple thousand miles away. I'll go on trips with you. I'll do this. Or maybe you'll want to go on a golf vacation by yourself. And I want to go to Italy and visit museums by myself. That doesn't mean that we're not still a couple. So I think people have to really speak up and say what it is they want.
It seems like women maybe have developed more of a social circle while they're working than men have. And it might be more important for women to keep those friendships going, whereas the men might find it more desirable to spend more time with his wife.
I agree that the women have more of a social circle because women, especially boomer women, have been multitasking our entire life. We've always been wives, mothers, workers, caregivers, social arrangers, all those things. So when we stop working, that's just one of the things that's gone from our lives. I'm speaking generally, of course. This doesn't apply to everybody. But a woman who's got 6 or 7 other things going, and her wife isn't going to miss her work life as much as a man who really was concentrated just on his career. So I've seen what happened. I've heard people tell me that women want to go out to lunch with a girlfriend. And the husband says, well, can I come? She's my friend too. I haven't seen her. I don't have anything to do. And if the wife says, no, we want to just have a women's day together, then he'll start calling her 5 or 6 times during lunch. And the classic is, well, where do you keep the ice cubes? That kind of thing, that it's just a reason for him to call and to connect and to basically interrupt her time away from him. So people have to, again, communicate, hey, this is my day. I'm going off to be with my friends. Maybe you could find something to do with your friends. Maybe you could make new friends. All these things are a problem. I don't like to pick on men and say that their retirement is different from women's, but in my interviews, and I talked to hundreds and hundreds of people, I found that there were some men who found that they couldn't really function without their job. And I gave them names. I gave the first one, I called that group ghosts. The people, they just want to stay home. These men just want to stay home. They don't want to socialize. They don't want to go anywhere. They watch television or they play on the computer all day long. And they don't think about anything else. And the next one is just the opposite. I call him the glommer. What he wants to do is follow his wife around the house all the time, from room to room, whatever she's doing. If she gets a phone call, he says, oh, who was that? Who were you talking to? Things like that. Then there's the grumbler who complains about everything, whatever it is. He says, oh, you're staying at the office too late, or how come you spend time with your work friends more than you spend with me? And how come you're going to see the grandchildren and you're not here with me? And then there's the one I call the gypsy, who's constantly on the move. He can't really stay at home. He wants to go someplace. He's picking up the next trip as soon as before he unpacks his suitcase. He's planning the next trip, and we're going to go here. And I think a lot of that is he doesn't want to deal with the reality of that he doesn't have any other place to go anymore. He doesn't have that job. He doesn't have that community. So he creates a new thing, and that keeps him on the road all the time. And my last one is, I call him the general. And he says, okay, I'm going to take over. You used to do the bills. I'm going to do the bills. And you used to do the housekeeping. Well, I'm going to assign tasks to each of us. Or I'm going to use my time to organize the house. And women have told me how they've come home from work and found all the cans in their cupboard moved around alphabetically. They knew where they were. But, this guy was used to being a manager. And he thought he could manage. And he's the same guy that'll go to the supermarket with his wife, even though he'd never been in one in 50 years, and say, well, how come you buy that tomato sauce? This tomato sauce is cheaper. And we already have 4 cans at home. And what are you doing? So, whether it's the general or the gypsy or the glommer, a lot of men have to deal with not having that job and that responsibility. And they have to recognize that it could be a problem. And both people have to work on it together.
So your final recommendation is?
Talk about it. If something's bothering you, tell the person. If you're planning your week, get a big calendar, sit down together, look at the calendar and say, okay, this is what I have this week. I have a golf game and you have a tennis game, and I'm meeting so-and-so for lunch, and you're going to do some volunteer work on Thursdays. Why don't we plan a date night for Wednesday night? And why don't we go to a movie on Friday night? And maybe you could do the shopping on Monday and I'll do it on Thursday. Whatever it is, put it in the calendar, because an empty calendar is pretty scary. If you think, oh, I have nothing this week, I'm open all week, whatever you want, it doesn't work out that way. You might read for an hour in the morning, or you might want to take a walk, and then all of a sudden, there's your whole day. And if you've been someone who was really working in a stressful job, you might feel guilty. Well, how come I'm sitting home here reading in the middle of the day? I should be out doing something. So it's a difficult transition. Plan for it, talk about it, and don't feel that you have to be the same person you were when you worked. That's my main suggestion is, if you were a type A person, you're likely going to be a type A retiree, and maybe try to be a different person.
Miriam, this is really interesting. We've talked so much about what it's like on a personal level to retire, but now hearing about how it affects a couple is really another slant that we hadn't talked about before. This has been helpful information, and I assume that most couples can learn a lot from it. We used to say, I married you for love, but not for lunch. And that's about as far as we got with how retirement affects the couple. So thank you so much for your research and for informing us and giving us some new ideas about how to deal with it again. Thank you, Miriam.
Well, thank you. Today on News to Use, we want to talk about grieving. Death and loss are part of life, and as we age, they are all too common. Yet so many of us do not know the right way to express our sympathy or to support a grieving friend. What should you say to someone who has just lost a loved one? Too often people feel awkward and avoid their friend altogether. Not only do you then feel guilty, you have abandoned a friend in need.
Although there are no rules for expressing sympathy, it is important to be there for your friend. So here are some thoughts on how to do that and some suggestions on what not to say. First, keep in touch with your friend and check in often. The best thing any of us can do is give our friends support and let them know that you are there for them. The grieving person might find it hard to reach out, so others must take the initiative and be there after the crowds have left. The first few weeks, there might be many visitors, calls, and cards, but soon the phone stops ringing, and he or she will need your support even more. Check in every few weeks. This will let your friend know that you still care.
Many of us are used to saying, I'm sorry for your loss. Grief counselors believe it is better to name the person who has died, to allow your friend to share memories. By saying, I'm so sorry about John, you are acknowledging a real person. Try not to say things like, how are you doing? As it might make the grieving person feel they have to force themselves to be positive. Also, avoid phrases like, there's a reason for everything, or I know how you feel. These phrases might make the friend feel like you are diminishing their pain.
And be active. Instead of asking, what can I do? Take the initiative and run errands for your friend. Do the laundry, bring in a meal, or organize the cards, food, and letters. The thought is what counts, and you are actually helping. And be a good listener. Your friend may want to repeat stories, but she needs someone who's not judgmental. So just listen again. Showing up for the living, let your friend know they are not alone in their grief.
Now that you know what grief isn't, check yourself before you deploy one of those common phrases that misunderstand the experience of grief. It's natural to want to help make things better when a friend expresses their grief to you, but it's most important to try to make your friend know she or he is loved, listened to, and not alone.
That's our podcast for today. Our thanks to author and co-producer Miriam Goodman. You can learn more about Next Village SF by going to their website, nextvillagesf.org. Our theme music today is from Hook Sounds, and Jason Dahlstedt is our engineer. And thanks to you for listening. We would love to hear what you would like us to discover and discuss. Please contact us at nby@nextvillagesf.org. Be well, stay strong, and remember, you weren't born yesterday. I'm Lynn Winter Gross.
And I'm Miriam Goodman.